If there's one place in the world that deserves the title of hell on earth, that place just might be North Korea. Its population is among the poorest in the world. The country is run by a tyrannical communist government that oppresses its people with constant surveillance, threats, and imprisonment. It keeps people in utter ignorance of the world outside North Korea. Even though it's officially a People's Republic, North Korea's leadership is more like a monarchy, with power passing from father to son ever since the formation of the country in the late 1940s. Kim Il-sung ruled the country for more than 4 decades until his death in 1994, followed by his son Kim Jong-il, who ruled until his own death in 2011. Today, the country is run by Kim Jong-un. Each of them have been paranoid dictators around whom the government built a cult of personality, going so far as to claim that these dear leaders have supernatural powers. North Korea is deeply isolationist, not allowing its citizens to travel abroad or communicate with anyone outside the country, and not allowing most people from abroad to visit. Its economic policies are equally isolationist. But that's not the whole story of North Korea. While many in the West describe it as the last true communist country in the world, North Korea has in fact evolved into something else, a massive state-run international criminal organization. Before we get any deeper into the story of North Korea, please subscribe to this channel to get notifications on our latest news and economic analysis. And if you like this video, hit the like button and help us spread the word. The Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953, ended with 2 separate Korean states, North and South. The South was supported by the US and its allies, and it began to build a capitalist economy. The North was supported by the Soviet Union and China, and in the 1950s it began to build a Stalinist economy. From the get-go, it was a disaster. Like the Soviets and the Chinese before them, the North Korean government collectivized farms, and like in the USSR and Communist China, this effort quickly turned into tragedy. Collectivization was unpopular with North Korea's farmers, who until then had owned their own land and farms. They didn't want to work in large state farms where they were given small rations to survive on. Some even killed their livestock rather than face collectivization. Food production dropped massively. North Korea's food supply is particularly vulnerable. Like its southern neighbor, North Korea is a mountainous country, and only about 17% of its land can be used for agriculture. When something goes wrong with food production, starvation arrives quickly. But as in the Soviet Union and China, the government collected food from the farms as if nothing were wrong, as if production were meeting its unrealistic targets. They took so much food that they left nothing for the people working the farms. Between 1954 and 1958, some 800,000 North Koreans starved to death, echoing the earlier tragedies in the USSR and China. While this catastrophe was unfolding, in the cities, the Workers' Party of Korea, the ruling party, began a program of industrialization, using an economic model they called juche, or self-reliance. They may have claimed to be self-reliant, but the reality was anything but. North Korea was heavily dependent on manufactured goods, money, and food from China and the Soviet Union. That's how it stayed until the 1970s, when support from the Soviet Union began to decline. This was partly because the USSR and China had a falling out, and North Korea appeared to take China's side. And it was partly because the Soviet economy was in decline by the 1970s, and they could no longer afford to subsidize North Korea. North Korea briefly opened up to trade with Western countries, exporting its natural resources through partnerships with Japanese and Dutch companies. But the country also began to borrow heavily from other governments, and when the 1973 oil crisis hit, the prices of its exports collapsed on the global market. North Korea could no longer afford to pay back the money it borrowed from foreign governments. Beginning in 1974, it began to default on its debts. This continued into the 1980s, and today, it's estimated that North Korea's unpaid debts stand at $120 billion to $150 billion. North Korea's economy became a pariah. Nobody wanted to accept its currency for payment. And so in the 1970s, the country's economic development ground to a halt. At the end of the Korean War in 1953, North and South Korea had roughly the same GDP per person. By 1991, North Korea's economy was 1/10 the size of South Korea's. 1991 was also the year the Soviet Union collapsed and North Korea lost whatever support it still had from the world's dominant communist power. China was now its only friend, but in the early 1990s, China wasn't the economic power it is today. North Korea's economy went into freefall. In 1995, the country experienced extensive flooding that destroyed its crops. Once again, mass starvation set in. The famine lasted until 1998, and and estimates of the death toll range from 350,000 to 3.5 million in a country with 22 million people. Like many other tyrants in history, Kim Jong II decided to distract the public from the country's internal problems by picking fights with foreign powers. Starting in 1998, Kim began a campaign of extreme militarization of North Korea. In 2006, the country exploded its first nuclear bomb. Since then, it has become a total pariah state, with not even China really wanting to be seen as friendly with North Korea. But turning to the military was not the only strategy that the country followed. One of North Korea's biggest problems is the lack of any currency that the rest of the world will accept. The country needed foreign money, and to get it, it began to get into crime. It started on a small scale in the 1970s when North Korean diplomats were sometimes caught smuggling contraband cigarettes and alcohol into Western countries. But by the 1990s, North Korea had expanded into the drug trade and counterfeiting money. These became huge sources of revenue for the country. Unlike with other criminal organizations, North Korea's crime network has the support of the state. It can grow opium for heroin openly on farms without having to worry about the authorities catching them. It can create fake US dollar bills using the best technology the government can procure. In fact, according to a US Secret Service report from 2006, North Korean counterfeit $100 bills are among the most sophisticated fakes to be found and are particularly hard to detect. These fakes have been found all over the world, including in Las Vegas. Most importantly, North Korea can use its diplomats as mules to ship illicit goods around the world. Diplomats have something called the diplomatic pouch. Essentially, they are allowed to carry goods in and out of foreign countries without those goods being inspected. This is meant to allow governments to move sensitive information, but if a government wants to, it can use the diplomatic pouch to transport spy technology, drug money, or counterfeit bills. In 2003, Australian authorities caught a North Korean ship trying to smuggle 150 kilograms of heroin into Australia. There were members of the Korean Workers' Party aboard the ship. It's estimated that North Korea is the biggest source of heroin in Japan and one of the biggest sources of crystal meth throughout East and Southeast Asia. Most recently, North Korea has expanded to a new field, cybercrime. Sometime around 2007, it established the Lazarus Group, a hacker collective that has become famous around the world for launching some of the most devastating hacks in history. Its success as a criminal enterprise is even more impressive when you consider the fact that North Korea has no public internet and a very limited electricity supply. The government has put enormous resources into ensuring the Lazarus Group's ability to function. These hackers stand out doing basic, unsophisticated hack attacks. For instance, from 2009 to 2012, they ran Operation Troy, an attempt to cripple South Korean and US government websites through DDoS or direct denial of service attacks. These are simple attacks that cripple websites by flooding them with countless connection requests. They can be carried out even by lone hackers working in their basement. But since then, the Lazarus Group has become increasingly sophisticated. In 2013, its hackers targeted South Korean media and financial companies, as well as critical infrastructure, with malware that erased data on those companies' servers. A year later, the Lazarus Group came into the spotlight when it hacked Sony Pictures. At the time, people didn't realize it was the Lazarus Group that had done it because the hackers who took responsibility called themselves Guardians of Peace. These Guardians released to the public videos of unreleased Sony movies, as well as scripts for future movies and personal data about Sony executives. The hack was in revenge for Sony Pictures making a movie called The Interview. It starred Seth Rogen and James Franco, who played journalists who set up an interview with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It's unknown how much financial damage was done to Sony Pictures by the hack, but the company put aside $15 million to deal with the fallout, and it pulled The Interview from its planned theatrical release, putting it out instead as a direct-to-DVD release. That move was criticized by many as giving in to North Korean tyranny, but it showed that North Korea's influence on the world stage was growing, thanks to its willingness to use cybercrime to get its way. Since then, Lazarus has gone on to stage numerous major hacks. In February of 2016, it attacked the Central Bank of Bangladesh, stealing $81 million, which ended up in the accounts of people linked to the North Korean government. In May of 2017, Lazarus launched a ransomware attack known as WannaCry in an attempt to extort money from institutions all over the world. It attacked everyone from Boeing to Britain's National Health Service to universities in China, encrypting their data and demanding Bitcoin in exchange for a return of the data. Though WannaCry was a big deal, it wasn't particularly successful. The hackers were only able to collect around $160,000 from their ransoms. These days, Lazarus Group is making much bigger money hacking crypto. In 2022, it attacked the online game Axie Infinity, making off with $600 million in players' cryptocurrency. Later the same year, Lazarus made off with $100 million in crypto from an attack on Horizon Bridge, a network that allows trades between different cryptocurrencies. So what is all this worth to the North Korean government government into its economy? It's hard to estimate because economic data is secret in the country, and what information is published is often a lie. But one report from 2008 estimated that a third of North Korea's exports came from crime, and that was before the rise of Lazarus Group. Fighting North Korea's crime trade is tricky. Governments around the world can go after individual shipments of drugs or counterfeit money, but they can't go after the heads of the organization because those are the leaders of North Korea, and North Korea has nukes. Sanctions likely won't work because North Korea is the most sanctioned country in the world, although these days Russia is giving North Korea a run for its money on that title. And in any case, sanctions are one of the reasons why North Korea turned to crime in the first place, which means that the world is stuck with the problem of North Korean crime, and until North Korea finds new leadership and a new way forward, we'll be spending fake North Korean bills, seeing North Korean drugs decimate communities, and suffering from North Korean hack attacks for years to come. If you like this video, please hit the like button to help us spread the word about our channel. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button to get notifications about our latest videos. In the meantime, check out one of these videos here to learn more about the economic debacles unfolding in the world today. Thanks for watching.